Well, welcome to the Fortuna MBA Admissions Masterclass. This is the first in a series of 4 webinars in which our team of former admissions gatekeepers will be taking you through the essays that are at the heart of applications to the world's top business schools. The upcoming 2021 MBA admissions cycle is likely to break records for the number of applications that the admissions offices in Boston, Palo Alto, Philadelphia, Fontainebleau, London, Chicago, New York, everywhere else. My colleagues at Fortuna are familiar with this counter cycle and the MBA. Whenever there's an economic downturn, we see many young professionals deciding that this is a great time to return to school and develop the skills and, of course, the network that is going to serve them so well when they graduate 3 or 4 years from now and hopefully help to get the world back the right way again. As we've discussed in other Fortuna webinars, the coming year will be extremely competitive, not only with more applicants vying for a place, but also the need for Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, and other top schools to absorb all of those deferrals that have decided to postpone for a year or two. When I was joined by Chad Losey, the Managing Director of Admissions at Harvard Business School at the Center Court MBA Festival a couple of months ago, I asked him if Harvard Business School would create additional sections in the coming years to accommodate currently over 200 confirmed deferrals. And he said this was under discussion. We wait for that confirmation because for Chad and for Kirsten Moss at Stanford, Blair Mannix at Wharton, their decisions are going to determine whether you're applying for 930 places in Boston next year, 417 places in Palo Alto, around 850 places in Philadelphia, or if a number of those places will already be spoken for from those that were supposed to start next month. So these are interesting times, and we hope that the next 60 minutes will provide each of you with the ideas, with the insights, with the inspiration to put together compelling personal stories to secure your place in the MBA classroom of your dreams. My name is Matt Simmons. I've written about business education for Bloomberg, the BBC, The Economist, Forbes, and with our hosts today, Poets and Quants, with John Byrne, I host the Center Court MBA Festival with so many of the world's top business schools. It is my privilege to be a co-director at Fortuna Admissions, which is a dream team of former admissions directors and admissions officers from 15 of the world's top business schools. So along with my expert insider admissions colleagues, I get to speak to many, many thousands of MBA hopefuls every year about their own business school plans and help them assess their chances of admission success. I know that there are quite a few of you that are joining us for today's session that I've been fortunate to speak with, and I hope that other viewers will take the opportunity to reach out for your own free consultation. In addition to the unrivaled level of admissions experience in the Fortuna team, we also compile detailed analysis of the MBA class of Harvard and Stanford from last year. So you can see where the successful admits, where they studied, what they studied, where they worked, and how their careers evolved before heading to school. It's an incredible piece of work and really shares some amazing insights about the sort of diversity that these two schools put together every year. And we'll be working on other reports for Wharton, INSEAD, and other top schools in the coming months. Now, my colleagues on today's masterclass, we're going to be focusing on the essays for Harvard and Stanford and Wharton. And these 3 individuals, they really know what it takes to gain admission to extraordinary schools. Carla, from your time at HBS, you were an associate director at the school. Isn't knowing how to stand out in what is going to be an unusually crowded pool this year, that's going to be more important than ever, isn't it?
I think, we've seen, as you said, in fact, it's funny, as you were talking, it reminded me how just this time last year, there was an article in Poets and Quants about how the deans were saying what we need is a good old-fashioned recession to get our numbers back up. So I think no one anticipated the COVID crisis, but I do think that, it's absolutely, we're seeing numbers uptick. I think, I was working with clients much earlier than I ever have been. So all of that leads me to believe that, yeah, this is going to be a record year.
Rachel Erickson, who is a Stanford MBA. In fact, Rachel, you were in the class of Derek Bolton, who devised this iconic Stanford essay about what matters most to you that we'll be looking at later on. And of course, you were an admissions interviewer for the school. From all of those GSB applicants that you personally interviewed, did you have a favorite question that you would ask them?
Yes, so I liked to start off by asking them to tell me about something that they were proud of, something that they'd accomplished, that they really cared about. And partially because I think it helps make people comfortable, puts them at ease, but also because the interview really is about giving the applicant a chance to put their best foot forward. As an interviewer, I wanted my applicants to succeed, and I wanted the candidate to just blow me away. So I would ask that question because it really gives them a chance to talk about why they would be a great person to admit to Stanford. And then, of course, I asked a lot of follow-on questions to really understand it and dig deeper into it.
Right. It's nice to get them off to a good start in these high-pressure interviews. Judith, you did many interviews at Wharton. You were with the Wharton Admissions for 11 years. Now, you saw the application booms of, 2002, 2009. Should applicants be thinking about this as a numbers game, or should they just focus on their own personal story?
It is so hard in this environment of so much information and so much conflicting information. I really encourage students to just do their thing. You know, you can talk yourself out of anything. And if you start reading Reddit and you start reading Poets and Quants and you look at the numbers and you're like, oh my gosh, where am I in all of this? Your candidacy doesn't change because there may be 500 more people in the pool. You know, I almost am pleading with people to understand that it's so hard to just put your blinders on, but it's almost like and I hate to use this, but if you just stay in your lane, it's summer, so stay in your pool lane, and just think about what's in front of you, because that to me is so much more important than the white noise going on and all the distractions of, oh, I heard the numbers are up. Oh, I heard this applicant pool is overrun. You know, you can really psych yourself out. So I very much encourage students to stick to your story. You're going to be admissible regardless of who else is in the lanes next to you. So that's, right. For me, that's such, and I talk to students all the time about that. And it's a hard thing to grasp. It's hard not to be on social media and look at what everybody else is saying. But if you can just sort of focus on yourself, I think you're going to be a lot happier.
And just so that you don't get cut off from Twitter for the next 12 hours, you're talking about socially distanced swim lanes, right?
I am talking about socially distanced swim lanes. As a matter of fact, sometimes, you know, every lane is empty in the one next to you. So thanks for that correction.
Now, I mentioned that this was the first in a 4-part MBA Masterclass series, and every Wednesday for the weeks to come, you'll be able to gain the insights of other members of the Fortuna team as we tackle, you can see from this screen, the essays for the other M7 schools. That's going to be next week, and then some of the S7 schools. And then, of course, the top schools in Europe that are seeing equally record application volume. But today is all about Harvard, Stanford, and Wharton, and finding that insight and inspiration. Now, each admissions office in Boston, Palo Alto, and Philadelphia, of course, they have biodata application forms, they have resumes, they have letters of recommendation. So by the time they reach the essays, they already know a lot about you. Now, Carla, can you just sort of quickly talk us through those basic steps and the sort of details that HBS has already considered?
Yeah, in fact, both I think HBS and Stanford have the most detailed pre-essay pieces of the application. So for example, you know, everything from basic bio data to, you know, every employer, HBS will ask for your most recent 3 employers, including internships, if you've had them, or they extend back to that 3rd. And they'll ask in a lot of detail too, tell us about what was your greatest challenge, what was your key accomplishments in the main part of the application before they ever see even your resume. So summarizing what you do succinctly, but not doing the copy and paste from the resume, which a lot of people do, which I think is a major issue. But making sure that you're able to, almost like, you know, if you're talking to a friend or, you know, a parent's friend or something, imagine yourself describing your job. Then they will see, you know, what your goals are actually too. So there's a section for HBS that's 500 characters actually, that you can go into detail about your short-term and long-term post-MBA plans. Then they have your resume. All of this is before they actually even get to your the essay itself. So when they ask, what more do you want us to know? The focus is on more. You've already told us a lot. Please don't just rehash what you've just shared with us. And I think this is the biggest issue for many, is that it is essentially, I've talked about it many times, but it's, do not do the resume to prose. Don't just say, okay, so in college, I did this and then I did this. And it's a series of accomplishments that is essentially, talking about what you did, but they have no sense at the end of it as to who you are, what drives you, and what is bringing you, kind of to the footsteps of HBS, and what can you bring to the table that connects to the three core things that they're looking for, which are engaged community citizens, leadership. And leadership, I'll note, is like not just the formal, oh, I was on this board or I volunteered for this. Leadership comes in so many different shapes and sizes. It can be, I solved a problem at work, or I came up with an initiative and then I acted on it and I, essentially had it come to fruition. And that can actually be explored a little bit too in the short answer section of the application. But beyond that, it's the engaged community citizen, leadership, and then the appetite and aptitude. Now, aptitude is going to be shown through your test scores and your grades. They'll have seen your education record, they'll see your GPA, and if they want to dig into your transcripts, which a lot of times they do, to see which different classes you took during your studies. And the aptitude piece is really to get a sense of, can you handle the rigor of the curriculum? If we admit you, are you going to be someone who struggles, or are you going to be someone who sails through? So they're looking to essentially have low risk applicants with high potential upside. So the upside then is further communicated through the essay, where you can, as Judith was saying, tell your story. Tell them what is driving you, what motivates you, what's inspiring you. And, as they're looking for individuals who will make a difference in the world, what is that difference going to be for you? It doesn't have to be that, you're out to cure Ebola, although that would be great. Coronavirus would be nice too. But, it doesn't have to be that large. It can be. In fact, I had a great essay once where someone talked about just how much she loved early exposure to management and seeing other members of her team kind of come to life. And she connected that to kind of the process of management to how she looked at a painting and creating a painting. And so it was really beautifully done. But through that, you got to see, wow, like painting matters a lot to her. So she's creative. She's also very thoughtful and committed, and can connect things, across different disciplines, which is also really interesting. So that's just one vehicle where she was able to show, leadership. And then the engaged community citizenship was really communicated through, I care about other individuals. And I'm someone who sits down and I enjoy the process of learning from even the people that I'm managing about what they're, what they need to succeed. And that she wanted to ultimately go on to, essentially chart a career where she was going to be leading an organization that really cared about the individuals and thought about employees as human beings. Unfortunately, that's a radical concept, I think, in some places, but it was powerful because it was real and it was her story. And so as close as you can stay to, who am I and why do I really want to do this? I think, a lot of people too get overwhelmed when they think about this, like, what does HBS want to hear? And that's not the way to approach this. I think you need to really sit down and think about, why am I doing this? What am I after here? And why does a general management degree that is going to teach me about financial accounting and operations strategy and, organizational theory, what am I going to do with that in my short-term as well as long-term ambitions? That leads me to believe that essentially HBS will catalyze that success. And so if you can see that and you can chart that, chances are the admissions committee will too. And then it's sort of like another layer there. Make sure that you're talking about things that you would also want to read about. I think that's another thing that people will focus on. Wow, I really have to like show off and stand out. And it's really difficult, I think, to show off or stand out through just look what I did. Where you can really connect is on, this is what I've struggled with and this is how I've overcome it, so that they can see the growth potential. Individuals who are just flawless and perfect, it's like, why do you even need an MBA? I want to be able to see how an MBA will help you kind of come into your own. I want to get a sense of what you can contribute to case discussions. And so there should be dynamism. There should be, things that are personal, that help them understand, I call it the white space, on the resume, things that would never actually show up on your resume that are really driving a lot of what's behind it. that makes sense.
I'll just bring in, because of course you mentioned the academic vitality and data points. Rachel at Stanford were looking at what an eye-watering 3.72 GPA average and a 734 GMAT average last year. Does the Stanford admissions office care about the essays when they've already got data points about how people will flourish in the classroom?
So the answer to that is, I think more than ever they care about the essay, because as they get all of these incredible applications with great transcripts and great scores and great resumes, they need to figure out who of these people they actually admit. And the way that they do that is really with the story. And once again, it comes back to what Carla was saying. It's about making them see that this person is going to be incredible at this school. This person is going to contribute to this school. This person is going to take what we can offer and do something amazing with it. And that's what you want to get across, because the thing to remember is that when you read a resume or you look at a transcript or you see somebody's GMAT score, that can impress you, but that's not going to make you fall in love with them. But when you tell your story and with the essay, you can really show what it is about you that they should fall in love with, and like just make them want to have you at their school.
Right. Judith, you actually helped to come up with the essays at Wharton, and you've read a few of them, I'm sure.
I have over my time.
Did the admissions team sort of skim read the essays, or as Rachel was saying, this opportunity to sort of fall in love with the applicant, really taking the time to get to know the applicant?
Very much so. There was no skimming, and I'm laughing because Matt and I go back a long time. And Matt, I remember talking to you about what I was reading, who I was reading, and what the profiles were looking like. That was actually the first part of the application that I looked at. I was less interested in the GMAT, and I was less interested in the GPA, because I feel like, unfortunately, when you see those things, you may become a little biased. Oh, this was a 620, what's going on? But if you already get to know the person and you see what motivates them and you see what they care about, then you start to create in your mind an understanding of who they are and why they want to go to your school. Wharton in particular, just from my experience, really cared a lot about how deeply you understood the culture and your contribution to the culture. So that was at the time, their primary question. And there have been so many different iterations since then. It could actually be a dissertation, I think, the number of essays per school and what everybody is asking. But without a doubt, that, and I agree with Carla and Rachel, is really the piece that's driving the relationship with the reader. And in all of these schools, you are being advocated for as an applicant. So people are going to the discussion wanting to admit you. And that's something that may be hard to understand, but that's your job in the application, is to give your advocate opportunities to do that, to bang the table and say, I want this person and this is why. So everybody goes in very optimistic, as opposed to looking for reasons to not admit you. And that, for me, as a reader, as a director, for so many years, as a mentor to people coming up through the admissions industry, you start with those foundational essays. By all means, the most important part.
As you said, it's an admissions industry and not a rejections industry, and finding those reasons to admit people. Right, so we're going to jump in, and I guess we're going to start with HBS. We could have done this in any order. Carla's already given us a few ideas, and you spoke, Carla, to comments that Chad makes about habits of leadership, analytical aptitude and appetite, engaged community citizenship, and then we have this very open-ended essay. I mean, what more should we know about? Should I be going back to my childhood, or should I just be focusing on the last couple of years professionally? Talk us through the essay and how our viewers can best approach it.
To answer your question directly, should I go into my childhood? It really depends. It depends on, if your childhood was incredibly influential in your development, then yeah, I think if you struggled, or if even if you came from, a very well-off family, but you struggled to ultimately fill the shoes of, someone, or if you're on the opposite end of the spectrum, it really depends. And it also depends, like, was that sort of what I like to call a catalytic moment in your life where you faced some sort of crossroads or some sort of challenge, maybe, I remember reading something where it was like someone was painfully shy as a child and she used to break down in tears whenever, a waiter would come over and ask for the order at a family dinner. And so she really struggled with, facing down her own fears. And so when you see the growth, that when she tells the story of, being class president in high school and then going on to leadership positions and then giving the keynote speech at college, it's like a much more powerful story where, that background and that context is very helpful. I think a framework that I've used, but again, it's like, I like it because it will always yield, as long as you're faithful and to the principles of being yourself and being real, that's going to really help you stand out. I think, the framework that I try and use with individuals is thinking about kind of like who you were, and compared to who you are today, and what's different and what's the same, and then to kind of think about, maybe you wanted to be a vet, or maybe you wanted to be an astronaut when you were a kid, or maybe, up until even middle of college, you thought you were going to be a lawyer or a politician. And so, there's different moments, and people come to different moments that challenge them in life. And I think back through, where have I been, and what are the influences and what are the factors that have shaped who I am today? And then you want to focus a little bit about, who you want to become. But I try and stay away from, advising candidates to just go straight up and have their whole essay focus on speculation, because, both Harvard, Wharton, and HBS, I think these are all institutions that do espouse this principle that, past performance is a strong indicator of future potential. And while it's not totally limiting, they want to see momentum. They want to see, as I was saying before, growth. And so, this can come, as leadership does, in so many different shapes and sizes. And the more personal it can be in terms of your own development as it relates to what you want to do, as you chart your future forward, I think is critically important, and an opportunity to really, just honestly think through these questions about, why am I doing this? Did you have a moment when you were applying to law school where it's like, why do I want to go to law school? Actually, I don't, and so what did you do then? Where are you going to be best suited? And I think what's also really interesting is that, I credit the millennials with, taking up this torch of like really looking for, how can we have business essentially serve as a force for good? And maybe by connecting to an MBA, I had applicants, admitted to different top institutions that are focused on education and changing the landscape there. You don't have to be interested in social impact to go to business school, though it is a business school at the end of the day. So if you want to just be, CEO of a Fortune 500 company, go for it. It's a great place to be, but you can dig deep here, but be sincere, because remember that, it makes no sense to try and pitch something that's going to be interesting to, the committee, and then you have to sit in front of them. Especially at HBS, the interview is very intensive around, tell us about your plans and ambitions. And if it's not real, what was the point of getting there? Because they're going to be able to sniff that out. So I think, again, stressing over and over again, like really think about yourself, because where you stand out and gain a competitive advantage is telling a story that they've never heard before, and that's your story.
You talk about the white spaces in a resume and avoiding that sort of resume to essay repetition, because again, in those white spaces, that's where we're really tapping into the underlying drivers. You talk about what led to that decision versus dates and places and job titles or qualifications that you gained, right? So it really is bringing all of those decisions to life.
Yeah, and I also want to add that I like the white space too, because it's a reminder that you don't want to have, this like visual noise where you have no margins and, too much text there too. I liked, and a lot of, applicants, I remember hearing someone, this was actually at HBS, someone said, if Elon Musk can fit his resume into one page, so can you. So, there's this sense that like you have to, squish everything that you've ever done. And sorry to get so in the weeds about the resume, but you can talk about it, and it should be a highlight reel of your accomplishments. That's where you do that, not the essay. That's where, every point there But you don't have to explain every single thing I've done. It shouldn't read like a job description. You know, I did this, this, and this. It should be, you should be able to look at a resume and see, okay, I understand that not only like what you do, but I understand that you're good at it. And then the essay is the opportunity, as you were saying, Matt, you know, to kind of tease out the sort of like, you know, understanding kind of like what motivated you to go from here to here. Oftentimes I get applicants who are like, oh, I didn't stay in investment banking for 2 years, you know, is that a horrible thing? And I'm like, no, it's an opportunity for you to talk about why. There's nothing wrong with seizing an opportunity that you see that's a better fit for you and then going for it. That shows nothing but tenacity. So own it too. You know, I think there's a temptation to sort of like try and hide different things because you feel anxious about it. And that's a mistake. I think you can say like, look, like, and it's also fine to own mistakes too. You know, because I think they're looking for individuals that have this mindset of like, not, oh my God, this happened to me and I have to hide it from the world. But what did I learn from this? What did I learn from this experience, and how did that help and change and shape my future direction? And how does that connect to wanting to get a general management degree and then go on to learn how to run an organization, whatever shape that organization might take, or even start your own. So there's an opportunity there to connect to, maybe it was like you had a really difficult childhood where it was chaotic, and so you honed really strong, you know, EQ. The other thing too that I'll mention quickly is that we talked a lot about, you know, trying to understand, you know, obviously IQ and EQ are, you know, have been sort of at the surface of discussion, but a lot of what I heard at HBS was around AQ, adaptability quotient. And I think now more than ever, that's super interesting because, you know, Nathan every year when he would do his sort of graduation speech, he would talk about, sort of paraphrasing the Darwin ideas around, it's not the fastest or the strongest or the smartest that survive, it's those most able to adapt. So think about the ways in life where you've been forced to adapt. You know, when things went wrong and you know, whatever happened in your life did not go your way, how did you handle it? What did you do about it? And how has that, you know, changed and shaped you? I think is super interesting, much more interesting than I'm flawless and what I would call like sort of brochures of humans, you know, where, you know, it was almost like when you would get a real person who was being vulnerable and honest, it's like, I've got a live one here, you know, it was exciting. And it's exciting because it's rare. A lot of people I think are fearful, but vulnerability, I think, can be interpreted and is often seen as courageous. So again, many different ways to approach this, but the who you are today and who you want to become, I think is a good high level framework as you think about kind of like, this is supposed to be a transformative time being in the MBA. So you want them to get a sense of like, yes, you're malleable. You may have, you know, certain things that remain true, like your integrity hopefully is intact and something that remains strong, but you want to see threads of continuity, but you also want to see potential for upside.
Well, I think you've created one of our hashtags for this webinar, which goes beyond IQ and AQ, EQ, and this idea of an awareness of AQ. Perhaps finally, as we've started with HBS, I want to bring you to the L word, and Harvard Business School, of course, talks about educating leaders that make a difference in the world. We hope that that's a positive difference. So identifying leadership, patterns of leadership, behaviors of leadership. And you said earlier, and I'd just like you to perhaps finish on this point, it comes in so many different shapes and forms.
Yeah, this was something that, you know, Dee was really, when Dee was the managing director of admissions at HBS and continues today, it's that leadership, you can have many moments of leadership even throughout the day. I came up with an idea and I raised it in a meeting, or I saw a politically dicey situation at work and helped to smooth that over. You know, there's lots of challenges that I think you can face at work or even in your personal life or in your extracurricular activities. Like I really pushed myself to run a half marathon, you know, can speak to values and traits and skills like discipline and, you know, sort of understanding this like short-term pain, long-term gain kind of mentality that I think they're looking for. But you also want to make sure that you're not just, you know, writing an essay about leadership. It's not a leadership school. I remember, people would say a lot of the time is that sometimes I don't think people recognize that. It's a general management program, but the capital L will come through on your resume. That'll come through, in terms of the capital L, what I mean there is formal leadership roles where I was president of this or VP or treasurer, or, I launched this effort, or I'm engaged with X, Y, or Z formally, whether at work or outside of work. But the lowercase L is something that they'll look to tease out from your short answers, as well as other moments where you have taken a stand. Maybe you stood up against, something at work, or you saw something, in the workplace that you thought this is not right. And so that there's so many different ways that this can kind of come into play. So I think, understanding, that this is something that they want to see, not just in the formal way, but in, how do you operate in a way that indicates this habit of leadership that is hopefully pervasive in different aspects of your life. And then make sure that you're working on communicating those, but not telling. It's really about showing. And that's something else that I talk a lot about, that is, I think, the essence of any great story, essentially. So, show them through your experience and describe the situation. Vivid details are what will bring it to life, so that the person who's reading it almost feels like they were there. What was it like when you had 3 different, partners asking you for, these projects or, input yesterday? How did that feel? And how did you manage that? How do you manage what is often a challenge for many of us, being really stretched and, learning to stand up for yourself in certain ways, or how do you manage that diplomatically? It's a really interesting question, and also something that you're likely to explore in the MBA program too.
We're looking at a generation that will be able to express their COVID attitude and how they've navigated the last 4 months. I'll finish with HBS with the final thought that you had shared, because we are likely to be looking at record application volume. Back in 2002, Harvard Business School had close to 10,500 applications. I can easily see it breaking 12, possibly 13,000 this year. That's a lot of essays to read through. And you just make the point, something that you'd want to read, right?
Mm-hmm. Please don't put your reader to sleep. I think it may be exciting to you, but this is where you can gut check and have someone else who may be disconnected from it. Even outside of an admissions consultant, I think it's helpful for me to, prompt my clients to have someone else take a look at it and see, is this number one even interesting? And if it's, where does it slow down? Where do you get lost? Where do you start to glaze over, if anywhere? Obviously, you have to keep length in mind too. You don't want to drown your admissions, reader in 6 pages of your life story. Focus on the aspects that are engaging in a way that, just in terms of how it sounds. And so I think it should be honest and real and true, but it should also have a pace to it as well that, keeps the reader moving along and wanting to see what happens next. And so, yeah, I think that was the biggest challenge for me, from my time, especially at places going back to INSEAD, to time at HBS, that a lot of the applications were, either really too short, so you didn't really get a sense of who's the human here, and trying to understand what makes their heart race, what makes their, pulse quicken, where did they really, knock something out of the park that meant a lot to them, in terms of an achievement, or an accomplishment that may not show up on your resume. So it's really about, maybe you had an impact on someone's life in a way that was really meaningful to you. And just as a quick side note, I remember another client of mine had, talked about a time in college where, her roommate, who was a very close friend of hers, was struggling with some serious issues, and she took a lighter load that term. And it wasn't to make excuses. She was able to do quite well. But originally, I don't think that she ever imagined that story would be relevant, but I think it showed her commitment to, and essentially showed her heart in a lot of ways. And so you felt like she was a really good person by the time you read, her, the experiences that she'd been through. And that's important. Principled leadership is something that should come through, but it's not just stuff that shows up in the office, I guess. So yeah, write something that you yourself would want to read. Imagine this as you know, do you want to hear about your friends? Like if you're at a cocktail party, let's say, do you want to have your friend talk about like, oh, so how's work going? You don't want them to sit there and say, oh, well, on this particular deal, let me define the different projects and deliverables. Like, no, that's not interesting. You know, what is interesting is that, you know, how did that project challenge you or change you, or were you able to step up? And what did that feel like? And did you love it? Did you hate it? You know, what are you learning that you're really good at, and what drives you crazy is much more interesting than the specifics or the tactics of any one deal or project that you're working on. So yeah, that's my advice.
So always choose your cocktail parties with caution. Rachel,
don't put them to sleep.
Yeah. 18 years ago, Harvard Business School had 8 essays. Perish the thought. At least they're now down to 1. But Stanford, in the last 18 years, has stuck with this tried and true, what matters most to you and why. In fact, when I spoke to Kirsten Moss when she first accepted the position as admissions director at the GSB, she told me how excited she was to be reading 8,000 essays about what matters most to people. So now you bring your GSB knowledge to help Fortuna clients to tackle this iconic and wonderful question. What's your advice on how best to tackle it?
So I think people will have probably heard this, but reflection and self-analysis are really critical here. And that's not always something that comes naturally to business school students and business people. So it may take a while. Give yourself the time to do that and be willing to really go deep. And Carla said this, and I want to echo it, is you have to be honest. If you tell the admissions committee what you think they want to hear, it will be obvious. It's not going to match what you've done. It's not going to fit up with what your recommenders say about you. It's not going to fit with your story and your life. So if you are someone who started investing in stocks when you were 10 years old and you thought that was the coolest thing ever, write about that. Don't write about social entrepreneurship, because it's just not you. And keep in mind also that they want to admit people who have everything. They don't want a class that just wants to do one thing. They want a class that has all these different types of people in there. So be honest, show who you are, and that makes a difference. And then the second thing I want to say is that the really important part of the essay is not what matters to you, it's why. There are certain universal themes that are going to come up a lot. People are going to talk about their family. People are going to talk about it with where they grew up and how that affected them. People are going to talk about things that they are passionate about. People are going to talk about the environment, but it's why that matters to you. And that's really what they want to hear. Another thing is, as Carla also said, it's stories, it's stories, it's stories. That the theme can be general, but you need to tell your story about how you have grown, your life, what has happened to you, and what you have done with that. And one thing to keep in mind when you're writing stories is you don't want the stories to just be about this experience happened to me. You want them to very much be about what you did. So it's okay to talk about something that did happen to you, but then you have to show where you fit into it. And it should be something that, this is another cliche, but it's pretty relevant, is if somebody picks this up and they read it, if they don't see your name on it, but they know you, they should know exactly like, oh, this was written by Rachel. It should be that specific and that detailed. And if the story isn't that specific and you don't get it to that level of detail, then start again and try to think about something else. So focus on that. And here's just an example is, say you're passionate about the environment. Maybe that's because you were somebody who grew up going camping with your family, and that's been incredibly important to you. Or you just care about public policy and you want to work on the biggest public policy issues of this age, and that has led you to the environment. Those are completely different people, and they're completely different stories, and they're completely different essays, but they're both completely valid. So the other suggestion that I have when you tackle this essay, because it's a really big one and sometimes it's hard to think about how to go into it, is that if you get stuck and you're struggling with what do I really care about and how do I articulate it and how do I make it a little bit more specific, is start writing down the stories, start writing down the things that happened to you that were important, start writing down the things that you're proud of, start writing down the things that you did that were really tough, start writing down your challenges, just write them down and then look for patterns. Because it's really interesting when you do this, you very, very often find patterns that you may not even have picked up on before you do this exercise. But then when you see it, you're like, oh, of course, that's what it is. That's me. That's what I care about. So that is really just a tip, because it is such a big essay, and it is something that we don't always get to think about, who are you, which is what it's really asking. So sometimes you start with the big and you go small, but sometimes you want to start with just the concrete specific examples and then think and extrapolate out from those.
So as you're using those stories to brainstorm, and of course that could become a visual document, or so certainly it's something that may well run over the 650, 750 word limits that the schools have. And one of our viewers has raised a very legitimate question of trying to find that balance between a word count of sharing the story and then how that is shaped us with our choices in future. So what is your sort of advice to find that balance?
Yes. So first of all, when you're initially writing, don't worry about the word count. Just get down what you think is important. And then once you've gotten that story out, that's when you start having to be completely and utterly ruthless and making sure that every single sentence says something new, says something important, and says something specific about you. So if it's a general sentence about, this helped teach me, and through this experience, I learned blah, 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 blah. Is that sentence really critical, or is it obvious from what you just said that you learned that? And if it's obvious, get rid of it. The other thing I will say is that the Stanford application gives you a lot of other places to put information. The essay should focus on one story. It can maybe have a couple of different themes in it, but the essay is not where you try to fit all sorts of different things in. You try to fit the most important thing in. And that can help, that you're only gonna have a chance to tell a couple of stories there. So make sure they're the most important, and make sure that they're the ones that are relevant both to this part of you, and then also potentially, depending on how you structure it, to your career vision and where you're going to go, the direction you're going to take things in, because that's also really important.
As you're talking, Rachel, with all of our panelists, we're getting some fantastic questions coming in. I'll try to fit some of them in as we go, and at the end it might be like a game show, and it'll be quick fire with a bunch of these questions. But just to sort of close with those essays and the different opportunities. You've talked, Rachel, about this sort of career vision, and if I can keep my slides straight. So talk us through this idea of no generic sentences. That helps us to respect the word limits that we're dealing with, but just that career vision and treating it like a case. What do you mean by that?
Yes. So you have to remember, you're applying to business school, and they expect to see someone who's really good at business analysis and thinking about things like it's a business. And whatever your vision is, it needs to make sense. It needs to be something that if you were to get up and you were to spend 2 hours discussing it and kick the tires and look for all of the areas where there's potential weaknesses, it's still going to hold up. So I think when you're tackling this essay, you can actually just understand 4 questions. The first is, you need to know why this career vision makes sense in a business context. Is there a need? What are the alternatives? What are the obstacles? All of that. Like, is this really a vision that matters and makes sense, and it's specific enough to actually be implemented? And then the second one is to think about, why does it make sense for you to implement this career vision? And that's when you want to think about your talents, your skills, your background, your experience, and how those make you a good person, the right person to do this, and a really good fit for this career vision. And then you can take it a step further and think about, but what are you still missing? And what do you still need? Because that's going to answer the question of, why are you going to business school? Because once you've identified what you are still missing, you can then start to think about and talk about how will this business school, and if it's Stanford, but you do want to be specific when you're talking about this, and not just have a general business school answer, but how is this business school going to help you get what you need in order to achieve this vision? And when I say no generic sentences, part of what I mean is, for example, if you're applying to Stanford and you say, I'm really interested in entrepreneurship and I want to take touchy-feely because I think it would be great to learn about leadership because I'm going to need that as an entrepreneur. There are a lot of people who could write that sentence. It's not something that's particularly unique to you. But if you were to write about something maybe that you'd referred to earlier, that you had a hard time giving people critical feedback if they weren't performing, and that was an issue for you. And then you say, and I want to take touchy-feely because this is going to give me the opportunity to practice this and learn how to do it effectively so that when this happens again, I'm going to be able to move forward. That's a much more personal sentence, and it's going to resonate much more in terms of who you are. And it's also, once again, it's giving the admissions committee the opportunity to learn more about you. They know their school. They know a lot of the reasons why people want to go to their school. What they want to hear is why you should go to their school.
The final one, I'm going to bring in, again, one of the questions that we've had from viewers. There's a reason perhaps why we've put these three schools together for this webinar. Many people will be applying to at least two, if not all three of the schools. And I think it also speaks to some of the things that you're saying as you organize those ideas of how you make it specific to each school. You know, should I be working concurrently on my Harvard and Stanford applications? Can I be cutting and pasting from one to the other? Now, you've reminded us that you know, the GSB has a lot of short answers as well beyond the two main essays. And it's very school specific, right? This is about why the GSB, the alignment and the fit with you as an applicant.
Yes, so there's the career vision and the why Stanford, which obviously is specific. So to answer your question, whether or not you can cut and paste, I don't think you can cut and paste, but I think that once you've written one essay, what you're going to write about in the others is going to be very consistent. You're going to use the same ideas. You're going to have to change how you answer it, but you might use the same stories. You might use some of the same sentences, but it really is going to be, you're going to have done the hardest work. And then it's figuring out how it works for each of these three schools and how it needs to be different depending on the school. And then just also to talk about the short answer questions for Stanford, you know, Carla mentioned how Harvard has different places where they ask you to talk about your accomplishments. So Stanford has given you these four questions, 3 opportunities to answer what is a time when you made a positive impact, and then one short 180 word essay on how your background has influenced a situation. And the first thing I want to say is that they are technically optional, but that does not mean that you should not write them. This is an opportunity for you to tell the school more about yourself, and like, you're crazy not to take advantage of it. It's really important. The extenuating circumstances essay is a genuinely optional essay, but this one you should treat like a really important part of the application. And when you're doing it, what you can do is you can map out what's going to go where. And what's great about this is that it gives you a chance to take those things that don't fit in your main essay and you didn't quite really get to expand on how important it was in your resume, and it gives you a place to put them. And so you can either go deeper and really explain something that's already there, or it might be that there's something that nobody knows about you. It's a hobby or it's an extracurricular, but it's something that really does matter to you, and then that's something that you can put there. And you want to think about when you're doing the essay, and Carla and Judith, I'm sure, will also talk about this, to make sure that you have all the important pieces there, and then also make sure that you're not being redundant, and that can help with the word count, obviously.
Right. Now, Judith, it was never going to be easy to go third on this panel. Rachel talked about having no generic sentences. There have been no generic insights in the last 40 minutes. Let's turn to Wharton. Of course, they've introduced a new essay this year. They still ask about what you hope to gain professionally from the Wharton MBA, but you really like the new essay, don't you?
I do. And thanks for letting me go third. I get to hear my wonderful colleagues share some insights. I'm learning so much. So I appreciate the batting order. I love this question. I just think it's a real opportunity to talk about the things that are deeply important to you. And, you know, it's tough when everybody knows that the big dogs in the room, Harvard and Stanford, are meaning these really in-depth questions. And I think that Wharton has chosen these kinds of questions, what do you hope to gain professionally and an impactful experience, to show that they're a little bit different in their approach. So they're asking what I like to say is like a combination question, in that pretty pragmatic, what do you hope to gain professionally? And then, you know, on the other side, like, tell us something about you, as Carla was talking about those white spaces, you know, what are the other things that we should begin to understand about you? I definitely believe that Wharton is one of those programs that wants to understand the rationale behind why you want to do X, right? So they are looking for, and I write this when I'm looking at student, you know, and client essays now, I write that all the time. Like, what is the reason? How did you get here? You weren't born thinking that you wanted to do something about education in your home country. You weren't born thinking you wanted to be the first female president of a certain kind of consumer packaged goods, right? So everything comes from, I use this word a lot, an origin story. That might come from the fact that I've been watching a lot of Marvel movies this summer because of being locked in with COVID. We've seen them all, so I would love to talk about it if you got a chance. But I really think that nugget of how you got here, what is driving these decisions that you're making, is incredibly important. So together, and Wharton has admittedly, I think that they've struggled with this combination over the years, just trying to get the right balance between the very pragmatic and then who are you questions. And I actually am really excited because I do think that this year they definitely got it right. And to me is an opportunity to take that valuable word real estate and really apply yourself in one way or another. So in earlier iterations, it seems like the questions were probably a little bit more closely aligned. And I kind of see this now as an opportunity to spend 500 words on your career goals, and then, you know, sort of lower word count, but really, really intensely personal reflection and sharing. And
the career goals, of course, features on many applications, but you talk about how this takes it a step further.
Yeah, I think because Wharton really wants to understand the run-up and then also the so what. And we've talked a lot about, and Carla had certainly mentioned, you know, this generation being much more attuned to, you know, how does your decision impact the wider world, or how does it impact an industry, not just this is the job that I want. And as a matter of fact, I was editing something this morning with Carla, and I sort of said, commenting on it, you know, it seems like this candidate is really set on this particular goal that they have. It's almost in a box. And what we want to do is push that box open and understand the more impactful ties that this particular position might have for this individual. So that's always in the back of my mind in my years reading applications, in my years now with Fortuna, understanding it's beyond the individual, but it is much more about the greater contribution, the greater impact, both you're going to have on your classmates. And again, if you think about an industry, if you think about an opportunity, so really opening those doors quite wide.
Now, we come to this new question that talks about really places a focus on community. And you talk about knowing your school. Rachel gave the example earlier of touchy-feely, just that generic statement. We all know it's one of the famous courses at the GSB. Wharton, like the other two schools, really wants to see that sense of an underlying understanding of the culture, the opportunities. So know your school.
Without a doubt. And I know that knowing your school is a little harder now with being able to do most things virtually, but not in person. I really, and this is for any school, so I apologize if it's a little bit generic, but when you talk with students and you talk with alumni, talk with students that are in different stages of their academic career at a program. Talk with alumni 5 years out or 10 years out or 20 years out. Those experiences are going to be so different. And that's what to me is really impactful. It's not just what you're doing when you graduate or what you're doing 5 years later, but what's your impact 20 years later? And think about how your Wharton relationships or how your Wharton starting point has really guided you. And I find, not to put too fine a point on it, but that alums are really excited to hear from current applicants. And we'll take half an hour to talk with you about how it's shaped their lives, their professional and their personal worldview. Wharton is the kind of school that you could use a lot of cliches. You could certainly say, oh, it's well known for finance, it's well known for Adam Grant, it's, this, that, and there's a list, I think, that a lot of students will go back to. So do yourself a favor and don't mention Adam Grant unless you absolutely mean it. I think that that's important. You really want your essays to be very specific and authentic to your own experience. So there may be faculty members that you're specifically interested in working with. And that I would err on the side of 1 or 2 examples that make a lot of sense for you, as opposed to, and this usually happens in paragraph 3, this class, this study group, this international program. There's almost like a formula. I really believe that less is more, and that if you hit home 2 points in that, let's just call it paragraph 3, you're doing pretty well for yourself. Not just about, this class will teach me about how to lead from within, or this class will teach me about running a certain kind of model. But what does that mean for you overall? And then don't forget, you're in school with 825 other amazing people each year. And then if you blow that up, you've got the University of Pennsylvania at your doorstep, right? So you're sort of looking at this in many, many different lenses, through many different lenses, I should say. And it's, again, as I talked about a little bit earlier, it's not just about your individual experience, but it's about these relationships that you're going to have with other people within the program, and then the relationships with the university as a whole. Look, I don't want to discourage anybody from citing specific professors, but most schools do have these certain icons that are out there. And I actually think, I saw, this morning somebody said, well, so-and-so is no longer on the staff, but I see, their words echo in the hallways. I was like, wow, that's putting a little of drama into the ghost of this particular professor. But I really encourage you to be thoughtful about who it is and how it is that you're going to connect with the program.
So Wharton's More Than Finance,
Yeah.
the Wilkie Parker story, Adam Grant, and connecting the dots, right? It's
without a doubt, connecting
really
the dots. And I definitely think that Essay 2 and Essay 1 are connected. It is a bridge for what you're going to get out of this program and what you're going to give to this program. And this is not super unusual as you look at the, again, Harvard's and Stanford's questions, but you want to try to give as much of a full picture of what it is that got you here. Paint them so that they feel like and I say this a lot, like they're in your back pocket, that they're with you, that they're understanding what you have learned from a certain cultural background or a certain experience that you've had, individuals that have influenced you. And so your job is to almost distill this information into a very, very fine, reduced essay. And I know that that's hard because you don't have a lot of words, right, to go on. But part of the struggle is to get it to that fine point. And those essays do stand together, as we've been talking about. And so there could be references going back and forth between the two. Without a doubt, the Wharton wants to make sure that you're spending the time to understand exactly what you can bring them. So you're not going to say, oh, I'd like to become a leader in such and such an industry. But what does that mean for the school community? What are you going to learn there? And what have you been learning that's then going to allow you to say, yes, I'd like to lead this panel on this conference. Or I imagine myself being very involved in this particular type of organization and bringing my insights from my industry to this class. So it's really becoming, and I'm going like this because you're going very, very, very granular explaining your specific contribution. And that, going back to your earlier question, what helps these stories stand out is that degree of specific relation to the question.
Now, there are so many great questions. I think I'd say we've had around 50 of them. Talk to us. You've had a sense in the last 60 minutes of the sort of insider expertise that's part of the Fortuna team. And as you think about next steps, the Harvard round one deadline is in 41 days. You can count them, and 48 days a week later for Stanford and the GSB. So do reach out to us. There are lots and lots of articles on Fortuna's website that talk about tips for each of the essays. You've come up with some great questions, how they tie into resumes. And I think that if we can connect with you, we'll be able to really give some sense to that. If I was to choose, just a very quick one, Carla, and I think if Tori is patient with us, we'll just have a few minutes for some of the questions. Just a very quick one. Harvard has no word limit. What would your guideline be?
It's so hard to say because I've seen such variation. It depends on, how complex your story is. But everything that you do share should connect. I don't like to set boundaries here, but I do think that when I look back at, the individuals that I worked with who've been admitted over the years, it's, seems to be anywhere between, like on the shorter side, I would say around 800-ish words, upwards of almost 2,000. But again, I've had almost 2,000 word essays that read in a blink, and sometimes you will come across an applicant who you're struggling to get through their 500, to 800 words. So it really has a lot to do with your specific situation. And I think, the final point that I just want to make sure and stress is that a lot of what I saw was the sense of like, I know someone who got in, so I'm going to follow their approach. And I think that's very dangerous. I think they don't want to see the same person twice. They want to kind of, get to know you. And so I think you want to make sure and lean on people who can tell you when it gets boring and dull. I mean, definitely don't go on, I think 6 pages is something I remember even hearing when I was at admission would be outside the scope of what would be acceptable. But there's a lot of variation. So it depends on, what is it relevant? Does it connect? Does it add to, what you're trying to share and exhibit about who you are and what's really driving you? And the essence is that they want to also understand like how you make decisions. How do you think? It's less about what you think, but more about how do you think? Because at the end of the day, the case method is really designed to help you make better decisions. And so they want to kind of understand what were the different factors driving you. So lean on individuals that you trust, but avoid the temptation to shapeshift into your friend who got in, because that's gonna invariably, essentially undersell you.
Rachel, after graduating from the GSB, you enjoyed a very distinguished career in publishing. There are many ways to tell a story, from William Faulkner to J.K. Rowling's. For Stanford's, what matters most? Should you explicitly write out what matters to you at the beginning, or is it something that you can weave into the narrative?
I personally think it can be woven into the narrative. If you are a very straightforward person and that this is the way that you think, then maybe you put it at the beginning. But I think that it can be really powerful to talk about, use a story, talk about an example, and then pull out what the thread is or what the meaning is to you. I think that can actually be incredibly effective. So you don't have to hit them over the head with a hammer. And once again, to the word count question, sometimes you just don't have time to be that explicit. Yeah.
Right. Would it be more linear at Wharton, Judith, in terms of this is me, this is what I've done, and number 3, this is my next step after MBA, and even those post-MBA career plans? I mean, you never hold them to those plans, right? It just needs to make sense in the application.
That is true. We had a dean famously say, if I had a nickel for every person that did something different at graduation than they actually said in their application, I'd be a very wealthy man. So it's expected that you're going to change your mind a lot. And no, schools are not holding you to your opening salvo in your application. Look, I think that storytelling gets the reader interested. So, just 2 lines in particular, to me, is a great way to introduce your topic. You don't have that much space, it's less than a page. So you're going to get to the fundamentals pretty quickly. But I like my colleagues really recommend like giving the reader something to hang on to. It could literally be 2 sentences, but this just has whoever's reviewing your application, and don't forget, advocating for your candidacy is really going to want to be remember that and refer back to it if they can.
Right. So my final question to all three of you, as we look at the likely record application volume in the year, it's going to be the most competitive year on record. But the idea of enjoying applying to business school, stepping back, I mean, all of you have spoken about these very introspective, sense of self-awareness, why you've done things, how that joins the dots. So, I mean, Carla, irrespective of how many people are applying, this is a great opportunity, right, to put together these applications.
It can actually be a lot of fun. That might surprise people, or they might, I mean, my clients sometimes laugh at me at first, and I'm like, this can actually be a really, really interesting time of your life. Look, ultimately, it's a search for authenticity, though. And so I think, invariably, really reflecting on this, I wish that I kind of taken this kind of in-depth look, honestly, at like, what is really driving me forward? What do I hope to accomplish? How am I going to even define success? These are really important questions to ask. And, I'm well into my 40s now, and there's individuals who will, I see that are like, I wish that like I'd been honest with myself at that stage to ask this, because it'll point you in the right direction. So I think going after these questions fearlessly with rigorous honesty is going to ultimately get you where you need to be. And it's a powerful process, and it can be really rewarding and enriching if you give it the attention it deserves.
Right. Rachel, would you add, of course, you successfully applied, went through that introspection. Would you add anything to that?
I guess what I would say is I think that the career vision in particular stands out as something where people do often find themselves surprised by what they learn about themselves and by an increased clarity that they see in terms of what they actually really want to do and what really does matter to them. And that's always really rewarding for me when I see that, is because even if it's not what they do end up doing with their life, it gives them an idea, it gives them a focus, it gives them sort of a lodestar that they can look at. And then if they do deviate from it and they do find something else, it's a conscious decision. It means that you're less likely to just fall into something because it's there and it's easy and they come and they interview on campus. And when you do get to business school, that is actually really important, is to know what is going to ultimately be the most fulfilling. And if you do these essays the right way, that will help guide you even when you are actually at business school.
Right. Judith, can you still remember some of the best essays that you read when you were at Wharton?
Of course. Wow, I've read some great essays in the past 24 hours. But I think the ones, as we were talking about a little earlier, where you really learn something from your own experiences, that you're not afraid to show yourself warts and all. I liked how Carla was talking about, like, we're not all, you're not a catalog applicant. And I know that the websites make everybody look like they're smiling and happy and, everything is 100% awesome. But the truth is, you don't grow unless you've had a failed relationship, or you've had a failed work experience, or you have a relationship, within your family that you've been working on, or something didn't happen for you. And I think those, and it's not the rising from the ashes story in particular that gets me, but it's the what happened and how did you deal with it. I almost don't even care if you were successful after the fact, but those, first time doing something that didn't turn out exactly the way you had thought, for example, and there were learnings from that. Those are the stories that really appeal to me. And I think that it's in every generation, because you guys are a different generation than 3 years ago and 3 years before that and 3 years before that. So each generation sort of has a different iteration of what that means for them. And I know, again, we're hitting you over the head with this message, but good storytelling, getting a hook, having your reader really want to get to know you more, that's going to be incredibly insightful and important for your application approaches.
Right. Well, the websites do have all of those smiling individuals on the campus. I'm smiling and happy because I just got to spend the last hour listening to the three of you and all of the insights. So for the viewers, I hope that this was of real value for you and wish you the very best of luck with your next steps. Do reach out to us with the questions. We didn't get to all of them, and we'll try to follow up with those that answered questions. Some were about letters of recommendation, some were about interviews. There's a ton of stuff on the Fortuna website that also speaks to those specifics. And equally on our YouTube channel. We also had the great fortune to host pretty much all of the gatekeepers from the top schools at Centre Court. We'll be doing it all again in October. Thank you for being with us in the last hour, and thank you to my three panelists, Rachel, Judith, Carla. Thank you very much.